invited me to just kind of offer that perspective from the success coaching side of referring students to mental health resources.
Okay, so we're going to jump right into the presentation here. And Heather, feel free to jump in here. You know, a lot of the reason this is so important, this topic is so important to talk about now is that, right, all of the experiences that are happening to students or that have happened to students over the past year, all of the things that are going on in our world, you're probably seeing it a lot more. A lot of our data nationwide and at our college shows us that students, their need around mental health resources is a lot higher than it might have been in the past. And so we think it's important for us to have this conversation, for you to be aware of resources about how to connect students to mental health to resources that are available, you know, within CCCC, but also, you know, external resources that are available in local communities. Heather, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I was hoping to put my hands on the article that I read recently, but I didn't at the moment. But I can tell you that I read an article that was very enlightening for me as far as our students are concerned when it comes to mental health. Not only are we have a group of students that are hitting a lot of the ages where mental health issues start to emerge, but as a community college, in comparison to universities, community colleges actually have a much higher level of mental health issues or needs at their colleges than the universities do, which I think is really coming out, especially now with the COVID, that has even elevated those needs even more. So I think this is a very important session for us to hold right now as a college to take all this into account, because we are definitely seeing those changes in our students and their needs. So I do appreciate everybody coming today, and let's put our thinking caps on and see what we can do as a college who probably has a lot less resources than the universities to deal with this, but we are doing what we can do, and I think we're being pretty successful in helping students. But hopefully this conversation will bring a little more to light for everyone. So thank you for coming today.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and continue with the presentation. You know, one of the things we always like to keep in mind is as students are coming to us or coming through us, right, they're experiencing most likely a big transition. And this is a slide that we pulled from our orientation that we talk about with students who are coming through our new student orientation, right, preparing them for the fact that this will be a big change for them, right? Many of which might not have ever been to college. Some students might be adding college courses on top of full-time work or on top of family responsibilities or other obligations, right? So, you know, being aware that making a change and a transition to college can be a really big challenge, and there might be things that are you know, thrown at students that they're not expecting, some things they are expecting. So we always like to keep in mind that, right, college is a transition for students, and a part of that process could be them accessing resources that they might have never had access to, or a need to access. So we just wanted to sort of frame this conversation in that respect. As we moved forward through the conversation about how we connect students to mental health resources. The navigating transition or transition theory, this is sort of brought forth by Nancy Schlossberg some time ago, but if you're interested in looking further into it, it's a great theory about how students transition as a part of the college experience. But again, just part of sort of framing the conversation today. The other piece is, right, and you probably, most of you have probably seen this graphic before, but this is from a student survey where they indicated, you know, we asked them to share 3 adjectives to describe faculty and staff members who made a difference in their lives at CCCC. So, and you'll see the biggest words here, right? Caring, kind, helpful, understanding, patient, right? And you'll see a lot of other words there, right? Those are all the words that they described to you, that they described you, right? Words that they use to describe you. And so, right, as we begin to frame and talk about how we connect students to mental health resources, they already see you, advisors, faculty, staff, in a way that, right, is already caring, and that you are caring about them. And part of caring about them is making sure that we're connecting them to the resources that they need. And so just a quick reminder about the difference that you make already is huge, right? We also wanted to share some data that has come out recently as a result of COVID-19. This is a graphic that we pulled from the JED Foundation. They released some data about surveys that they had completed in local high schools and colleges, and you'll see here they asked the question, how would you say your emotional health has been compared to before COVID-19 outbreak? And you'll see a combined 63% or 62% of students said their emotional health was worse than before the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So you'll see that, right, consistently, mental health resources and mental health concerns are a concern for college students, but it's risen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, just showing you that the need has increased over time, and especially over the past year. And so you'll see, right, that their mental health was far worse, or somewhat far worse, in those categories at the top. They also asked about how much are you concerned with the following categories, and you'll see there that 56% of students are significantly concerned with their ability to care for their mental health. So again, a piece of information there that just lets us know that this is already a concern for students. So 56% reported that they're already having trouble taking care of their mental health. Which of the following mental health or emotional health challenges have you experienced in the past month? You'll see right at the top of this chart here, anxiety, social isolation, and loneliness. Boy, that's a big one, right? All of us have been in some sort of isolation over the past year, but especially our students, right? As we think about remote learning and the change to remote learning for many, depression, trouble concentrating, right? All of these things are at the top of the list, and some of these things are maybe higher now than they might have been previously. This was an article Alex shared with me from Inside Higher Ed about how counseling center usage, and I think mainly this is at, obviously, I think a lot of this research was done at four-year institutions, but an interesting graphic for us to consider as we talk about this topic. A study was done at 63 colleges. College counseling centers reported 32% fewer students in fall of 2020. Compared to fall of 2019. However, those that did attend appointments, their attendance at appointments increased 20%. So of those that were coming, they attended on a more regular basis than before. So an interesting piece of information to consider as we continue down the conversation here. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and she's going to talk a little bit about CC Cares. Or is that Heather?
That's me.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So as a college, and we do not have our own mental health center, so what ways do we have to get students to resources? And this is one of many ways, but this is the main resource that we have here at the college to connect you with resources that you can connect students with. And so if you look at the first page, our main page of our website, you will see at the bottom under the blue bar the Central Carolina Cares link. When you go into that link, it will pop up 3 different areas that you can look at. So the first one is where we can help. It's going to describe not only what Title IX is, but what our behavioral assessment team is about. And Adam will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. On the end, you have a link for File a Report. And in the middle, for resources, we have the Find Support. That is the link that you will go into, and it will have various types of resources for students listed by county and by resource. So whether it's a mental health resource they need, food insecurities, of course we have some things on campus too, but anything like that, domestic issues, there are all sorts of resources filed in our information under the Find a Support link. And we are constantly adding new resources as we learn about those, so it does grow. So I will, oh, no, you're good. Go ahead, Adam. I'm going to turn it over to Adam so he can talk a little bit more about the BAT team.
Yep, so many of you are probably familiar with the BAT team, but BAT stands for Behavioral Assessment Team. And for those of you who are not as familiar, behavioral assessment teams grew out of really the early 2000s, when specifically, right, one of the biggest events that we are probably all aware of is the incident at Virginia Tech in the early 2000s. And so many of many behavioral assessment teams or behavioral intervention teams grew out of that time period, where it's really a team of individuals from across all 3 counties and that represent various areas of our college that really are reviewing and monitoring different student situations. And they could be related to suicidal ideation, self-injurious behavior, concerning behavior that it's exhibited in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And these typically are situations that don't fall into a category related to student conduct or our student policy or judicial decision, but that we are concerned about and that we want to continue to monitor in case, number one, we need to connect students to resources that might be available to them both on campus or within their local community, or if there are other things that we can provide to the student or require of the student in order to be really just more successful at CCCC. I think really the biggest point of the BAT team is concern for the individual student, but also concern for the larger CCCC community. And so there's some BAT team members on the call today. It really does represent sort of all, it's meant to represent all areas of the college. And sometimes when you might submit a report to us, we might take action on something, and other times we might not, and we'll just monitor that situation in an ongoing way over time. So, so that's a little bit about the BAT team. Sometimes it's sort of really difficult to understand exactly what we do. And I would share with you that if you are even more confused about incidents that fall in the BAT team's category, then we always like to share, and I think Heather shared this last time, but if you have a question about whether something should be reported, then that is your indication that it should be reported, right? We would rather you over-report or report something that we really don't need to know, rather than not report something that we really did need to know. That's where we would really, miss out on information that's vital in order to sometimes intervene in student situations in order to best care for them. So that's a little bit about the BAT team, and I am going to go ahead and turn it back over to Megan. I think Megan is this one. Sorry about that one.
It's okay. Thank you, Adam. So, as you guys probably are familiar, I am the coordinator for Student Accessibility Services, but I did want to go over how my services tie into this conversation. So, students who may have mental health concerns, their concerns may rise to the level of a disability. A disability is defined as a medical diagnosis that substantially limits one or more life areas or activities. And so that's a very legalistic definition, but essentially, if their concern or diagnosis is exacerbating is being affected by the environment and exacerbating their ability to participate in our programs and services, they may be eligible for accommodations. And so if a student were to disclose to you that I've been diagnosed with XYZ impairment or disorder, and I'm having trouble, that opens the door for you to say, have you heard about student accessibility services? You may be eligible for accommodation. You should talk to Megan Sherman. Here's her card, here's her RAC card, here's her email address, whatever way would be most effective for you. I'll put some of my contact information in the chat after I'm done talking, but that if they directly disclose a diagnosis, that gives you an open door to make a direct referral to the office. Please don't promise any specific accommodations or recommend any specific accommodations, because that's going to be a nexus between what their clinical documentation says, what barriers they may be experiencing in the environment, and what's reasonable within your course design. So making the referral is a great opportunity to help a student be connected to services that we have internally here at the college. If they kind of talk around it and don't directly say, I am diagnosed with blank, that is more of a balancing act of what's appropriate at that given time. It may be helpful to tell them about several services, this one and maybe the next I'm about to talk about. That way they're service connected and they know their options, but we're not directly saying you may be eligible for accommodations, because if for some reason they come to me and they aren't diagnosed or don't meet the level of the definition that we have to follow under the regulations, it can sometimes cause tension, and the students may feel like there's disparate treatment going on. If you want more help making that referral decision and talking through with me what the student said and what kind of recommendation I can assist you with, I'm happy to email or do a Google chat or a phone call about the best way to help a student make contact with this office and when a direct referral would be best versus more of an indirect just share of information about several resources. But that's a little bit about my services. The key thing that I wanted to mention at the town hall the other day that I didn't, and I want to harp on here, is students have to self-identify to request accommodations. That is the only way that they will be accommodated, is if they come to me and self-identify and start that process. Otherwise, the college isn't formally on notice. So the next program kind of ties into support, but it's more of an external support. So because of we've been talking about mental health resources on campus for many years. If you've been to any of Dr. Scoletti's conversations about that, you've known that this has been in the works. But last year we added the Student Assistance Program to our supply of resources for students. So this is a free mental health resource that includes short-term counseling and a needs assessment with a clinician. Students can call in and be connected with a student assistance provider who is going to talk with them about their concerns. And this is a 24-hour hotline phone number that they can call 365, 24/7. They call this number, they're introduced to a student assistance provider. That student assistance provider is going to take them through a short questionnaire of what's going on, what their concerns are, and their concerns can range anywhere from mental health life management, grief, addiction, depression, school management, time management. There's a whole arsenal of resources that they can refer out. But for today's conversation, if a student were to be experiencing mental health concerns and they call in, they're going to be referred to a short-term counselor who will do a needs assessment and provide 3 free sessions for them to get started on that support. Their goal is to help alleviate that need and meet that need as much as possible within those 3 sessions. If in that needs assessment additional resources are needed, meaning long-term support is necessary, the system will help that provider talk with the student or their family. Their family is also eligible for this program, and talk with them about the best ways to move forward, whether that's with health insurance, or if they're paying out of pocket, if there's a reduced cost benefit somewhere that they can be referred to for ongoing counseling or services. They really do try and customize their offerings and their referral to the needs of the student, as well as what they're able to maintain long-term if long-term support is needed. The other blessing in the student assistance program is if the student has multiple concerns, they can call in for grief counseling and then call in later and get three sessions for the grief counseling, and then call in later and say it's stress management, and they need to call in and do 3 additional sessions with grief or stress management. And those 3 free sessions on any unlimited topic renew every year. So if they want to revisit something that they started in 2020 and 2021, their 3 free sessions on that topic will renew and be available. There's also, in addition to the online, or the phone number, there's also a very robust online catalog of information around taxes, money management. There's some coaching worksheets about time management, stress management, life management. There's some tax information as well as legal assistance that they document within the website. So both resources are very robust and very useful for students, and a great referral if you find that a student needs some support in that way. Aunt Bertha. So in addition to the SAP, the Student Assistance Program, if a student were to come to you and say they need a doctor or they need help with another resource in our community, Aunt Bertha is a great place to start. So within the program, this is also on the CCCC Cares page, on the same page as the SAP. You pull this up, type in their zip code, and then you can search by specialty. So if the student, like last year, a student came to me and said that he recently graduated and he needed a speech therapist because his services ended with his high school experience. And so we used Aunt Bertha, put in his zip code, and we found the closest speech therapist, and he was able to take that to his parents as at least a starting point of conversation to see if their insurance would cover additional supports. So you can search by zip code, you can search by specialty, you can search mental health, doctors, a variety of resources within Aunt Bertha. You can also email, it's either email or text, Adam, remind me. You can send the student resources within Aunt Bertha as well.
Yeah, you can email them or text them, either way.
Perfect. And that's on our CCCC Cares page. There's a direct link to Aunt Bertha. So in addition to those, we also have Daymark, and Daymark is in all 3 of our counties. So as we move back to more in-person life, Daymark may be a preferred resource. The SAP program starts virtually over the phone. They will do virtual appointments or in-person appointments depending on the provider. Daymark does in-person appointments. So from, I believe, 9 to 2 every day, Daymark is open for intakes, and they can do essentially crisis intervention. So this is more of an immediate in-person need, and students it kind of runs the same way. They come in for a 30-minute intake. If there is an emergent need, then they will be supported in an emergent way that day. If it's something where they need long-term support, whether that's individual counseling, group counseling, addiction services, so on, JMARC will refer the student to those resources within the network or local community resources. It is a reduced cost, so JMARC does accept Medicaid, Medicare, and other private insurance providers. So that's a really good resource for students who may be in need of monetary support. If I recall, at least back in 2017, they did have an income-based consideration for students who were uninsured to help them have resources at their disposal as well.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up here. So when you are working with the student, what are some of the things you should look out for? What would be things that would signal that, hey, there might be something going on? And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'm just going to give you a couple of things that would probably jump out at you. Would be things like the way that they are acting. You know, they may have been a very good student, very quiet, and now that they are speaking out, maybe showing anger. Or it could be even the other way. It could be a student who has been very outspoken and loves to answer questions in class, and now they've become very withdrawn and quiet. You would see things like a change in their appearance. They may come in and don't look like they've got it all together. Maybe losing weight. You may even sense things that there may be some drug or alcohol use going on, and that may be a change in what you have seen before. They may have a hard time concentrating in class. They may be moving around a lot, getting up and down, not being able to focus. So those things might be things that you would observe in your students. Also would be their grades. Their grades may be going from really good to bottoming out. It may be that they just totally quit turning in work. So any kind of change that you see in a student could be a sign that there is some type of issue going on there. And there are a lot of things that can affect that. It could be anything from relationship issues, domestic issues, financial issues are a big one. We would definitely see that. And it could even be that there's a cycle going on that as they continue to go down and their grades fall, then they're also going to become more depressed or down because of the grades. They may feel like that they're not fitting in. Any kind of changes in their, of course, drug and alcohol use, again, could be causing a problem. So there are a lot of issues that you should be on the lookout for that could be causing the signs that you see. And at those points may be when you would contact the BAT team. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts. And Alex, I'm going to ask you to kind of join in with me. So some of the things that you would want to do would be create a safe and calm environment. You may want to say, hey, you know, I think I'd like to talk to you for a minute about maybe what's going on. Could we step in my office? Or, hey, let's go have a walk. Could be some things that you would want to do as far as being prepared for this kind of situation by having some open-ended questions that you could ask students in these situations. And definitely you would want to listen. So Alex, when you have students that you are wanting to have a conversation with, how do you do this in these situations?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dean Willett and Adam and Megan, for inviting me to be a part of the panel and talk a little bit about my perspective as a success coach. My bar for referring students to mental health resources is really, really low. If the thought crosses my mind, you know, the student seems really anxious, the student has a lot on their plate, the student's going through a divorce, you know, whatever the circumstances might be, I think that the more that we talk about mental health, the less stigma there will be around it. And so I mean, I think I refer students to the student assistance program at least a couple times a day. And you know, if the student thinks that they need it, and maybe I'm the first person to ever invite them to think about using a mental health resource, then they'll use it, right? But if they don't think they need it, then they won't use it, right? So, but we want to leave that up to the students. You know, everything that you've talked about, creating that calmness, opening, you know, open-ended questions, supportive questions. We have to listen to the student, and not jump into trying to fix. We're all problem solvers. We all want the best for our students. We want to make sure that they have the things that they need. But in order to get to the point of referral, you have to listen. You have to, you know, ask those open-ended questions. What are they saying? What are they not saying? What are they saying between the lines? The power of a pause. I was thinking about that the other day, where, you know, we like to fill the silence, right? But the power of a pause and letting the student, you know, have that silence for a little bit if they need to think and process your question, right? Some key words, you know, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm anxious, I'm feeling blah, unmotivated, I don't have anyone to talk to, I feel like I'm going to explode, I think I'm depressed. There's so many of these very subtle, very common phrases that we hear, and so that listening part I think is just so clear, Dean Willett, so important. You know, I think being accepting, respectful. Students are scared of anyone with a title, faculty, staff. You know, they're scared that you might think less of them for what they're sharing. They may be sharing things with you that they've never shared with anyone else. So thanking them for that trust and reassuring them that they're not alone. I think those are some of the key things that you can do. And again, recognizing that stigma, right? You know, there is a ton of stigma around seeking mental health resources. And what I like to often do, even in conversation with students, is I'll say things like, you know, our society, I get it. There's a lot of stigma around counseling, but the way I think about it is if I fell down and hurt my ankle, I'd go to a doctor, right? Well, we experience heartbreak, stress, any number of things that need attention. And what counseling can do is help give you some strategies to cope with and to face each day with a little bit more strength. So I think that recognizing of stigma is a key do, and naming it. You know, it would be easy just to kind of say, "Oh, you should seek help." No, like recognize that there's stigma around seeking help, but give them the encouragement to do so.
I think that is probably the biggest barrier that we have to face with students as far as getting past that stigma. So that is so important. I'm so glad that you have a good way to deal with that. So again, here we go a little bit farther. The easy answer, you know, that sometimes is what we maybe fall back on is an easy answer, something that, because we feel like that we want to fix this, you know. And so how do you deal with avoiding that easy answer, Alex, and making sure that they're getting the resources that they really need to have at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Dean Willett. There are times where a student shares something with me, and my internal dialogue is, oh, that's not, you know, that's not a huge deal. I don't say that. I refrain, right? Because what we want to make sure that we do is all pain is relative. So that first point on the slide, take them seriously. I had this analogy given to me, and it stuck with me for a long time. Pain or anxiety or grief, it's like a gas in a mason jar. The gas, no matter how dense the gas is, will reach every nook and cranny of that jar, no matter how dense it is, right? So pain the pain of experiencing loss of a loved one versus the pain of high expectations from parents, right? Like, sure, we can rank those, but we shouldn't. We really need to, when students are saying, I'm really struggling, um, resist that urge to kind of write it off or think that it's not a big deal, right? Because if a student is struggling and they voice that they're struggling, the odds are they're asking for help, and they're crying out for help. And so, I think a lot of times the gut reaction might be, oh, you're going to be okay. You're going to make it through this, right? You can certainly assure the student. You can say, you're not alone, but really emphasizing, you know, we we have to, as a society, we have to encourage the use of mental health resources because, what happens when we bottle things up, to use another analogy, it's like a soda bottle, right? If you shake it up, it's going to build up the pressure and ultimately there'll be a breaking point, right? And so how can we start to release some of that pressure, release some of that anxiety that you're dealing with, and and again, these are helpful analogies for students to hear too, to say, you know, there are free resources that are really wonderful and helpful. And I know there's a lot of stigma around that, but I really think I think it would be helpful. So I think that that's the key there, is not making a judgment, but leaning on, this student seems really distressed, and no matter what pain they're dealing with, it could be really serious. We know the stats, right? We know the pressure that students are under. So let's take it seriously.
All right. And I think that it's really important to also remember that even though that we want to help them, we have to also remember that we are not their mental health counselor. So bridging that gap there to make sure that they get to that resource is what we're doing here. But we also have to take care of ourselves. So, connect them and do that, but sometimes we have to stop. Wait a minute, I can't fix this myself, but I can certainly try to get them where they need to be. So that's where we come in to encourage, and you have done a great job of encouraging students to use those resources. So confidentiality, because we can't promise that. When you talk to a student, how do you phrase that with a student to make sure that they understand that there could be times that we can't always keep things confidential?
Absolutely. Dean Willett, I think it comes back to your point about our limits of care. That's the phrase that I always go back to, because I've taken a couple counseling classes in my college student development program, but I'm not a mental health provider. And so knowing what my limits of care are, and I'll even say that. I'll say something to the effect of, I really care about you, and I feel really honored that you shared this struggle that you're going through, but I don't feel like I have the tools to be able to help you, and the strategies to help you best cope with what you're struggling with. And so, as a representative of the college, one thing I'm going to do for you, Dean Willett, is I'm actually going to contact our care team, and this is a group of faculty and staff at the college. And basically what they'll do is they'll reach out to you and they'll say, hey, here's some resources, and you have every ability to engage or not engage with them. That's totally up to you. But this is my way of saying I care about you. And, even after our call, I'm going to send you an email with the phone number and the website to the Student Assistance Program. That way, even right now, if you want to hop on and give them a call. But that's kind of how I would phrase it, right? You don't want to promise confidentiality. You can say that, right? As a representative of the college, by law, I am required to share about certain things, right? Especially when it comes to anything related to Title IX, right? Sexual assault, discrimination, stalking, these things are way more common than we think, and unfortunately. And so making sure that we're doing our due diligence by reporting that, I think Adam said it, when in doubt, if the thought even crosses your mind, should I file a care report? Go ahead and file the care report, because the care team's not going to judge you for filing the care report. They're going to say, thank you for documenting this. And then they're going to determine, okay, it looks like you've got this handled, or they might, Adam has G-chatted me before and said, hey, thanks for the report. Care team's got it. Do you think they'll ask you, do you think we need to take any further steps? And so, for me, it's about documentation, but also ensuring that the student has the proper support, right? Again, I'm not a mental health provider, so I want to make sure that I'm working with my colleagues. Now, what I will say, I didn't say this in the last mental health session that we did, the care report can sometimes feel like it's only for, sexual assault, sexual violence. Because the way the form is formatted, it does feel like, you do have to type in there if there's, a victim, right? Or a survivor. So don't let that language throw you off. Just leave it blank if there's not a perpetrator, like just move on, type in the student's information, type in your information, and then describe in the box, right? So don't let the form kind of throw you off. I do think there's kind of this feeling that that's really only for like very serious things. Well, who's to say that an eating disorder isn't super serious, right? Or who's to say that, this student who just disclosed something really important that they're struggling with, that the care team might have a resource that you don't know about, right? So, utilize that resource is a huge thing. And then closing the loop, I think that's also on the slide. Following up with the student. So after you've had that, conversation, let it sink in, maybe in a day or two, or even in the next week. Give the student a phone call, catch up, and just in a non-judgmental way, gently ask, hey, so last time we talked, I told you about the student assistance program. Did you have a chance to use it? I totally understand if you just haven't had time. It's just a way to gently nudge and remind them that it's there. And again, they could even kind of tell you that they used it and they didn't, right? It's that's up to them. But at least you're doing your due diligence. But I do think that follow up, because if they were asked a second time, maybe they'll actually use it, right? So I do think that follow up and closing the loop is super, super important. And a lot of times the care team will want you, Megan, or you, Holly, or you, Jennifer Babb, to be the one to do the outreach, because you have the relationship with the student, to check in on them. So hopefully that was helpful, Dean Willett.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Alex. This was, I think, a very good explanation for all of us to think about the do's and don'ts when we deal with these students. So I know that it comes into also some questions on, so what about FERPA? We're supposed to keep information safe and sacred. And so how does this happen to work when you have these kind of situations? Well, the thing about FERPA is it does allow us to share information about troubled students among college employees and the security office as well. So if there's any kind of emergency or any kind of health or safety issue, we are able to share that with each other. It doesn't really mean that there's a blanket release for information on that student, but it is on that situation. So if there is any kind of dire emergency, like something that is going to happen immediately, like that student is going to harm themselves or is going to harm someone else, or someone is going to get hurt at that point, that is definitely a time that we would want to not worry about the FERPA, because it allows us to speak to each other on this. And in that situation, you should immediately, if you are working with a student, if you are able to call 911, that is the first thing that you would need to do. Also, our security office, we now all have the security button on our phones if you're in the office, and you can push that button and call. Yeah, thank you, Amy. You are so right. You need to dial the 9 and then dial 911 because you've got to be able to get the outside line. But if it's easier for you to call security immediately to get them to come to your office, either way it works in your situation. But of course, we always want to try to get the police involved if we have to. If you have a troubled student that is in crisis, but it's not anything that is an immediately harm or life or death situation, at that point, you can also reach out to the behavioral assessment team. And we will work with them to respond as quickly as possible. And we also will, if there is any other type of information there that would bring in security, code of conduct, anything like that, we will address that through the behavioral assessment team. So this is very important to know that FERPA does allow us to have these options in these situations.
Okay, so you responded earlier to our poll about how you might want to engage with the larger group today. But we're going to start with and what we want you to do, we're going to sort of run through this initial scenario here. And if you could, either in the chat box or if you feel like you want to unmute and share, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. But scenario 1, we want you to take some time based off what we've talked about today or your prior knowledge. How might you respond to this scenario? So Sammy, a student in your course who started really strong, has recently missed several assignments. You also notice that they seem disheveled and distracted. You decide to pull the student aside after class and check in with them. During the conversation, the student shares that they've recently found out that their parents are getting a divorce, and this has caused a lot of disruption in his life. He also mentions that he has had exposure to a counselor in the past, but he's afraid he can't afford connecting back to them right now. So how might you respond to Sammy? Again, if you want to share your ideas through the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Yeah, Lindsay, student assistance program would be an excellent resource here, especially if the student might be afraid of finances or that they can't afford going back to maybe their original counselor. Sure. Yeah, Shauna, I mean, I think letting them know all of the resources that we might have available, so SAP and other things, and like in our local community that might work for that student, and then letting them choose that option. Yeah, sitting down with them, pulling it up on computer so that they see it. Sure, that's a great strategy. Other things we might want to think about as we approach Sammy. Yeah, Amy, just sort of sharing your concern, right? And, pointing out the specific behaviors that you see, sharing the resources. Perfect. Corey, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to share?
Oh, yeah. So I think, too, just going along with that, maybe just kind of sitting down and acknowledging that that's a tough situation to go through with college before kind of giving the resources. Because I think sometimes, at least just working with students in the TRIO program, they kind of just want to be validated that it is tough.
Yeah, so just providing that validation that, that you understand that they might be going through a tough time. So that alone, just sort of that listening part that we talked about earlier is an important piece here. Excellent. All right, well, thank you for sharing there. We're going to move on to scenario 2, and I think Megan's presenting this one.
Thanks, Adam. So our second scenario, you are reading through student essays from class. Lynn's essay contains the following. My mother tried to commit suicide about 4 years ago, and I remember being so scared at the time and angry too. It still bothers me. Sometimes I cut myself because the pain makes me focus on it and not what my mother did. You are shocked by this because Lynn has been a very outgoing student and has not written about any personal issues before. What would you do? Shauna, go ahead.
So this actually aligns with something I was reading the other day about how English instructors tend to learn more, hear more of these stories than a lot of other types of instructors, just because of the type of work we ask them to do. And I've had situations, not this extreme before, but where first thing I'll do is thank them for sharing with me. And then I'll kind of like, is this something that you're still feeling? You know, have you thought about getting help? Have you talked to someone? And then here's the resources.
I really like how you start out with the gratitude piece. I find that sets the tone for a calm and almost a relaxed sense around the conversation, not the topic itself, but this sense of ease and appreciation, reflecting back to the student about that, and helping build that rapport that's needed to continue the conversation. And then inviting them in to reviewing those resources, most definitely. I do want to reiterate something that we mentioned earlier, and somebody else can add to things too. But whenever we hear of student self-harm, that is definitely a report situation, whether that's a BAT team report or a direct contact with Adam or Dean Willett. Definitely. That's a good point, Reed. Yes, definitely. Considering that the self-harm being a key aspect, have they thought about suicide before? And if you're not comfortable asking those questions around suicide ideation, there are additional resources and people here who are trained in that conversation through mental health first aid, who could assist you in that process. Maybe that's a broader conversation that we can have as a group about how to handle that situation specifically. But there are steps that you can take, and inviting the student into the conversation, directly asking them if they have thought about self-harm, and then saying, have you thought about suicide? I don't know, Reed. That's a very good question. Do we have a list of the people who've gone through the mental health first aid training? I'm sure that since it's been paid for by the college, yeah. So Adam's saying yes. But yeah, I think that would be good. Anybody else have any additional ideas about how we can address Lynn's concern? I think we covered a lot, which is good.
Megan, I'll just add, I think it's very easy in the context of an assignment to kind of be like, oh, well, that's not a cry for help. Like they're just writing about, this is their personal statement, or this is their, they just mention it, or, oh, it happened long ago, right? And we don't want to make those assumptions, so I think it's just really important that if the thought crosses your mind, the student, has been through something that clearly is having a big impact on them, even if it's a class assignment or a discussion board, you know, or you, gosh, there's so many ways that students can communicate that they're struggling with things. There was a student at a previous school, and I learned from their peers that they were doodling images of guns on their notebook, and that was, you know, obviously really alarming. But when I approached the student and walked them to meet with a mental health counselor, they thanked me for that. And so again, I think, you know, I think that people make these assumptions that, you know, oh, it's just students being students, or they, you know, that was in the context of the assignment, I don't need to report that. But always better to be safe.
Definitely. Abundance of caution is a big piece. We also have a responsibility as an institution to respond in you knowing that as a staff member, as an extension of our broader campus community, is essentially us being put on notice that we do need to ensure that the student is resource connected. We obviously cannot force them to be resource connected, but whenever we're informed of certain levels of concern, we do have a responsibility to respond as an institution, both as a stewardship of our resources and our community, and also just a commitment. Yes, definitely, Dean Byington. So thank you, and thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Are there other, I know Megan, Alex, are there other things that you want to share about your experience of how you've connected students to mental health resources? I know you've sort of shared all along, but are there any other things that you would share with this group?
I think inviting students into the conversation and showing that appreciation is a huge first step. Anytime that a student, it's part of my role to be more informed in their specific needs or areas of concern. But before I take it beyond what I'm seeing on the paper, I always invite students to continue the conversation with me. I don't know where they're at in their particular moment, and what sorts of conversations may be further triggering to them. So I always invite a student into a deeper conversation with me, saying something along the lines of, would you be willing to discuss this further with me? Can I ask you a few questions? That sort of thing. And then if they say yes, then I politely investigate, you know, have you had suicide ideation? Are you resource connected? How long have you been experiencing depression? Are you open to additional resources? And then we go into SAP, and obviously there's a lot of listening and conversing. If they say no and they shut me down, like, no, I'd really rather not discuss that. It's just, I'm not at a good place right now, or I'm not comfortable talking with you about that, whatever the case may be. I will email them and just, I'll tell them and say politely, I want to make sure that you have resources at your disposal. So I'm going to send you a few different things just as options for you to consider. We don't have to discuss it any further if you're not comfortable, but I would like you to know about some resources. And that way I can respect their privacy and their need not to go any further into detail, but also ensure that they're resource connected.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Alex, anything on your end that you would share about your experience? I know I tend to, we get a lot of reports through the reporting feature on our CARES website, and I know a lot of times they're coming from all over the place. So I know people are having these conversations. So I think it's important to just keep in mind, right, that employ some of the tools that we've shared today, right? Those pieces around listening and validation are so important. Anything else, Alex, Heather, Megan, that we want to share before we end today?
Adam, I'll just reiterate something Dean Willett said, which is, taking care of yourself through this too. We don't realize sometimes that the things that students share with us might trigger things from our past or things that we've had to deal with. And so, remembering that we have, similar to the SAP, we have the EAP program. We have, I think a lot on our plates. We're busy people. We care a lot. And so I think just taking that time to take care of ourselves too. You asked about kind of a story or an anecdote that can kind of bring a lot of things that we talked to today to life. So an example, there was a student about, I'll just say last semester, and we set up a success coaching appointment, and it was, meant to be about getting organized and helping them study for test taking skills. And I noticed that the student was taking the virtual call in their car. So again, noticing the environment. So I just said, oh, I noticed you're taking the call from the car. Is this still a good time? Are you traveling somewhere? And the student said, well, I just don't have any privacy in the trailer. And so, this is, allows me to have, at least have no distractions and, have some privacy. I said, oh, great. I said, awesome. Well, let's jump in, asking them how they were doing my coaching thing, right? Which is supposed to be all about academics. But as we know, the things that students experience holistically that can have just as big of an impact on their lives. And so I asked, how things were going generally, and the student said, I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of struggling right now. And they said, I assume you're okay with me being gay, but my family's not. And they said that they saw that I shared my pronouns in my course intro, and they just said, I just feel alone. I feel like I don't have anybody I can talk to, and I feel really overwhelmed. And I said, first and foremost, like, I so appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'm glad that you can trust me, and that I want nothing but your success and your well-being. And that this must be really, really hard for you, and hard for you to be going through. And the other thing that I remember talking about is, I don't know what you're going through. I've never personally experienced, coming out to my family. I can only empathize. I've had several friends who've experienced a lot of stress and challenge, and when they came out to their families. And so, I think just reiterating, you're never alone. Sometimes you need to just vent. And then, toward the kind of last quarter of our conversation, I said you're dealing with a lot of stuff, and if you ever need to talk with somebody, I always recommend counseling and mental health resources, because there's a huge stigma with it, but it's so helpful. And the college actually has, did you know they have a free resource? And he said, no, I didn't know that. And I said, well, yeah. I said, all you have, you can call in 24/7 any day of the week. And, I said, a lot of people, a line that I often use, I said, a lot of people view reaching out for help or being vulnerable or going to counseling as a sign of weakness. But there's a scholar, Dr. Brene Brown, who says that one of the strongest things that you can do is to be vulnerable. So having the courage to say that we need help is actually really, really important, and it shows your strength. And so, I really encourage you to use this resource, and I want to know how it goes. I'm not a counselor, but I'd love to know what you thought of the resource, and and again, follow up with the student later on. But that was just one example. Again, it would be very easy to just say, oh, well, they just shared something with me. That's okay. Great. Thank you for sharing that with me, and not connect it to mental health, and not from the standpoint of like, you need help. You're on the cusp. This is an emergency, but you said you're struggling. And so I think, again, taking students at their word when they say they need help and when they're struggling, and referring them to those resources, which we're so lucky to have that SAP program.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Alex. I think we're near the end of our time together today. Does anyone have any questions or anything they would like to share before we log off today? Yeah, Caroline, that's a great question. I am hoping so. This is a statewide initiative. The North Carolina Community College system has really been the driver behind student assistance programs. So I am hoping this continues to be something that is just always will be available for students, much like the employee assistance program is. So I'm hoping so. One of the things that we'll most likely be sharing out as we end out sort of our first year with student assistance program is just some statistics on the amount of students that have used it and what they've used it for. And that way we can sort of take a look at usage and how, and also look at ways that how we can drive, our students to this resource a lot more. But I am hoping that it continues. All right, well, if you do have questions, feel free to stick around and we'll hang out for a couple of minutes. We do appreciate you taking time to share your morning with us. Happy Friday, everyone. I think this is such an important topic to talk about. We will most likely be continuing this conversation and doing some additional presentations down the road. So it would encourage you to join us or encourage folks you work with to join us. Oh, and I'm seeing some questions come in here.
Holly, the list that the college has compiled covers the campuses that we cover. So Chatham, Harnett, and Lee. The Aunt Bertha system covers everywhere a college a student may be. So the ones that we have vetted in a PDF format are within our service area.
Yeah, Holly, the best resource for, out of service area resources would be Aunt Bertha. And I think that's the beauty of Aunt Bertha is that you can search by zip code and really narrow it down per county regarding, related to the specific scenario or specific resource that you're looking for.
Yeah, some of their materials are so specific, which I like Wake County actually has special groups for women from Latino backgrounds, for example,
Right.
or other minority groups. Chapel Hill has extensive substance abuse. And it'd be kind of neat if we could connect people with that. And I just want to throw in one more point that was brought. A lot of these are emerging adults, young people, 17 to early 20s, and I found that I actually have to walk them through making that appointment on the phone because they'll tell me they're going to follow up on it and they freeze. I mean, these are kids that have never made doctor's appointments for themselves or dental appointments. I found that with my own children when they started college and needed help. So sometimes just being there and having them dial the number and sitting there with them and nodding. I know we can't do that virtually very well, but that really helps move them into getting that service.
Yeah, Holly, that's a really good point. And, I think that's so true. When we were in person, I would find myself, if I didn't do it in the moment if they didn't do it in the moment, I would follow up 2 or 3 times and, they still hadn't done it. Right.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that. That's a great strategy there to have them do it right when they're with you.
Yeah, and this has been wonderful, Adam and Alex and Olafel. Thank you for doing this. And I want to do a shout out to Mental Health First Aid. I thought that was a really excellent program for training people that may not be as familiar with mental health services.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and thank you for sharing those pieces of information. Mental Health First Aid will hope to get it back again in the future. It's such an amazing program. If you've never been you know, exposed to it. It's an awesome resource. It's community based. But and I know some people are asking, we'll try to get that list out in some way of those that are trained. That way, whether it's on the internet or have it available on a website somewhere, so that way students, folks can access that.
Well, thank you. This is well done. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly. Shauna, do you have a question?
Yeah, kind of a request. I would love to have a very short slideshow that highlights some of these resources that I could share with all of my classes preemptively. Like,
sure.
This would be a great thing at the beginning of the semester because it helps to open that conversation, to let them know that I'm a resource for them, but also not singling them out, like sharing it with everyone kind of thing.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, we could create a couple of slides with some of the resources today and others, just, you know, for you to pop into a slideshow in a very generalized way. So yeah, we'd be happy to work on that and get it out. Maybe we can send that out to Scott and some of the other deans. Just send it out to all faculty, and that way they have maybe have access to it in case they want to use it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Shauna. That's great. Any other questions? All right, folks. Well, I think we are sort of at the end of our time. Feel free to stick around if you want to chat or ask us more specific questions. But thank you for taking time to share your day with us. I think this has been a really, really good conversation. We will definitely continue it down the road, and we'll try to get some slides out and that list of mental health first aiders available so that everyone can see that information. So thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.